Hello, and welcome to Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick. So today is the Munich Security Conference, which is always a big deal for international affairs, international security, international diplomacy. And there's an interesting person who's making an appearance there, and that is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's surprising that she's there. The security conference is usually it's not that members of Congress don't attend that. They do, but usually these are people who are much more involved in foreign policy than AOC has been until now. Um, the fact that she decided to go to this conference tells us something. There's already been a lot of speculation that AOC might run for the Senate in 2028 against Chuck Schumer, possibly in 2030 against Kirsten Gillibrand. But I think, to be perfectly frank, that her appearance in Munich for this conference is a hint that she just might be considering running for president in 2028, and that would be a very interesting development. I think, I think what people would look at it right now as a long shot, but historically, especially in the Democratic Party, long shots come through. Just ask Barack Obama. She is certainly no more of a long shot than he was. She has, in fact, um, more on her side than Obama did, in the sense that she is an outstanding fundraiser. She has great name recognition, which Obama did not have at all. When Obama was just beginning his campaign for president, most Americans did not know who he was. He had only spent a little bit of time in the House. He had just gotten into the Senate, and he just, from there went and ran for president. So she has a lot more name recognition. She's certainly a polarizing figure in the sense that she has been a target of the right, but that's not necessarily a bad thing in this regard. She's the type of person who can rally a lot of people on the left and at the center. She's proven herself to be an outstanding fundraiser for the Democratic Party. It's one of the reasons Nancy Pelosi likes her. She actually there has a lot going for her. If that's what she's thinking, and this appearance in Munich says that she might be, she's got more in her corner than you might think that she does. Now, that being said, when you're running for president, it's, in any election, domestic issues rule, and that is where her focus has been since she's been in Congress, no doubt about it. She's never been big on foreign policy. It's never been, her major thing. If you look at the squad, she is not one of the more vocal people on any foreign policy issue. She's been someone who takes more or less progressive, mainstream progressive stances. She is a bit more towards the center on foreign policy than somebody like Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib. But she's certainly, very much progressive. Um, she has sometimes angered some more radical leftists by taking somewhat more moderate views. But I think that most people would agree that she has generally progressive views on foreign policy, but she doesn't make a big deal out of it. It's really not been her thing. So I think that her decision to show up at Munich is a way of starting to address that, whether she's considering running for the Senate or the presidency. If we look at what she was saying, she was on a panel that talked about populism and the rise of populism around the world. Um, if you look at what she was saying, I think she's off to a very good start conceptually. So she talked about the U.S.-led war against Iraq, as well as NAFTA. So she was talking about history. She's not just, she's not limiting herself. She very much ripped Trump's policies. No, don't get me wrong, but she's not limiting herself to that. She's really offering a much broader critique of American foreign policy over the years. So, and I think that's going to be an important component of a good, solid Democratic candidate in 2028. they're going to need to do that. It can't, the strategy of we're not Trump is not going to work. The strategy of we're not Republicans is not going to work. Kamala Harris, I think, proved that, and I think Kamala Harris herself would if you got her alone in a room and in a moment of honesty, I think she would absolutely say, "Yeah, that was a miscalculation. We needed to offer more, and we didn't, and that's why she lost." So it's important that that she is taking more a broader critique of not just American foreign policy either, but of of international affairs in general. And she's talking about trying to blaze a trail towards something new. She talked about a working class centered politics. And the way she put it was that this would help stave off the scourges, excuse me, of authoritarianism. And she's right. I mean, the reason that we're seeing the rise of authoritarianism all around the world, this is far from an American phenomenon. We're seeing it and we're seeing it, by the way, in many different places. It's not just right-wing populist parties. If you look, for example, at the UK, um, sure, you have Nigel Farage, right? And he is certainly that right-wing populist figure that we're talking about. But what's the Labour Party done since they've been elected? I mean, the first thing they did was attack the pensioners, and try it, and try and impose all these measures of austerity. And now, just this week, we saw a court in the UK basically admonish Keir Starmer's government for taking a stance against the group Palestine Action and making them putting them on a list of terrorists with a group like ISIS. That's insane, right? But it was done to basically cut off the ability of the British people to object to the UK's involvement in the genocide in Gaza and in supporting Israel in general. And that is, an explicit attack on freedom of speech. We've seen plenty of that here in the United States. We can talk about the heavy-handed tactics, the expulsion of students who were protesting, Mahmoud Khalil, as we know, many other examples. Locking people away for writing op-eds. I mean, we've seen how this has gone, and and all of this, it doesn't just come. It certainly is motivated. Don't get me wrong. Again, it certainly is motivated by people's sympathy for the people in Gaza and what they are enduring. That is absolutely the case. But this kind of authoritarian response, and the more I think advanced, if you will, organizing that has gone on around not just Gaza but around other issues. We've seen mass demonstrations around many issues. That is all a result of the basic inequalities that have been growing at an exponential rate, especially since the financial crisis of 2008. And really no politicians, even the most left-wing ones, have been making those connections, or at least very few. I mean, you have a couple, I suppose, but certainly nobody who is looking to get into office has been making those connections. And AOC is blazing that trail, and it's really, really important. It's the kind of thing that can rally quite a few Democrats behind her in many ways, not just and I'm not just talking about bringing out the voters of the left-wing progressive voters who sat out the 2024 election because they just couldn't flip that switch to support somebody who was completely not just complicit but a partner in the genocide in Gaza and would not listen to people telling her to stop doing that. Um, she can use these ideas to motivate more moderate Democrats as well, because even moderate Democrats are realizing that what they've been doing has not been working. Okay. This sort of abundance theory that people like Ezra Klein are pushing, it's not taking hold. Again, even among it's taking hold amongst the people who are putting it out there, which are the right wing of the Democratic Party, which is who Ezra Klein is appealing to. But it's not taking hold among sort of moderate liberals, um, people who do believe in support in using government to support working people. people who believe in strong unions, people who believe in government, a strong welfare state. And this is going to become more and more necessary. And in the near future, as we watch artificial intelligence and robotics develop, people are looking now and they're kind of laughing at AI. Oh, I can see how AI is so fake, and I can see right through it. But they're looking at the sort of pathetic failures of some of the latest advances in robotics that have not quite gone as they went. Those things are going to improve, and they're going to take jobs away, just as automation did years ago. The idea of universal basic income is going to become more and more important because there just aren't going to be enough jobs to go around as the years go on. And we're probably not that far off from seeing that sort of thing becoming a reality in the United States and all over the world. And the idea of working class centered politics, a politics that works for all of the working class, uh, is going to be necessary, not just to win the next election and beat whoever it is, J.D. Vance or whoever the Marco Rubio, whoever the Republicans put up there, but to really turn the tide globally against this right-wing populist movement, because the problem is that the other side of it, what's been called the left, has not been left. It's been programs of austerity. It's been programs of mild reform that have changed nothing fundamentally as life gets worse and worse for the vast majority of people. Even people who make a living, they have to struggle more. They have to work longer hours. They can't spend as much time with their family. They can't do as many things as they did before. They can't feel as confident in their future and for their retirement, etc. Even those people, life has taken economic life has taken a downward turn. Let alone people who live paycheck to paycheck or not even that. So I think she's on the right track here. Because give you an example, here's what she said. She said, I believe we're seeing in economy across economy around the world, including the United States, that extreme levels of income inequality lead to social instability and drives in the sense in authoritarianism, right-wing populism, and very dangerous domestic internal politics. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think she's nailed that. And if she's expressing that in a presidential or a Senate campaign, I think she's going to get a lot of attention, and not only from progressives, not only from the left. That may sound to people like democratic socialism, and it is, by the way. Um, but it's going to, if you frame it in the way she did, it's logical, it makes sense, it's realistic, and it will resonate with people. So, but getting back to foreign policy, she condemned, kidnapping Maduro, blockading Cuba, the threats to allies over Greenland, and looking the other way in a genocide. So, she clearly took aim at Donald Trump's foreign policy in order. She also talked of a return to a rules-based order. And in a moment, I want to discuss for a minute what that means, because I think that is something that really will need to be pulled apart and thought through a little better, because it didn't come off great. That was the one thing that she was talking about that didn't come off great to me. And I think that she needs to flesh it out more. But I'll get back to that, because I just want to mention before I get into that she also mentioned hypocrisies. That it's not just the inequality, but the hypocrisies, the idea that we talk in the West, certainly in the United States, we use all these big words and highfalutin words, and she's not, I think, talking so much about Trump, who is a hypocrite, but he's so shameless about it that we all see through it, and everyone knows what he's really talking about, and they either go along with it or they don't. I think she's talking here more about, when she's talking about hypocrisies, I think she's talking more about the Democrats, the centrist Democrats, the Joe Bidens, yes, the Obamas, the Harrises, the people who, they call them corporate Democrats, centrist Democrats, whatever terms you want to use, but the people who talk about these ideals, talk about America always wanting to give everyone an opportunity and everybody a fair deal and everyone a fair shake. But when it comes down to it, their bills are paid by very wealthy oligarchs, and the policies that they end up endorsing, to one extent or another, reflect who's paying their bills much more than the ideas that they're putting out there. And I think that's important. And yes, I think people looked at that and they said, hey, I think they looked at Obama, and they said, well, Obama was change you could believe in and all of this stuff. But when it came down to it and the financial crisis hit and there was a choice between bailing out people and bailing out banks, the banks were said to be too big to fail. They weren't. Okay. There were solutions. By bailing out the people, you bail out the banks. You don't necessarily bail out the bankers. So the system would have survived. It would have changed, but the system would have survived by changing by bailing out the people, because when you bail out the people and when you get people on their feet, those people are spending money. The economy is moving. What happened instead was a whole lot of people got a whole lot of money. The institutions that were so badly flawed and corrupt remained, and things moved along as usual with very little penalty paid by the people who caused the problem. And that's been the case now for almost 2 decades. And we are seeing now the results. It's been, and we can, of course, I'm using one example. I mean, we can go back much further than that, and I could go on, talk about the roots of Richard Nixon abandoning the Bretton Woods system and the gold standard. I mean, we can get into all sorts of things that have led us to this space, from Nixon to Reagan to Clinton to Obama to Bush. I mean, it's been a long progression, and it's been a bipartisan one. And I think that's the hypocrisy that AOC was pointing at that needs to change. Okay, so where should she go? What should a foreign policy, real progressive foreign policy look like? Well, you start with what she called the rules-based order. Look, there can't be international anarchy. That's what if you look around the world today, that's where Trump and the right wingers are trying to bring us to international anarchy. No international institutions, no restraints on powerful states. The power, it's a completely Hobbesian world. That's where they're trying to bring us. And they've largely succeeded. They've largely undermined international institutions. They are very weak right now. Powerful states, powerful people can do what they want and get away with it. We're seeing that with the Epstein files. That may be an example of where something got exposed, where you're going to need some scapegoats and you're going to need to throw some people to the wolves, maybe even some institutions to the wolves. But that will be done in the service of most people who are involved on both aspects of the Epstein scandal, the horrible abuse of young women and girls, and the incredible networks of shady deals that he facilitated. All of that is, everything we're seeing now is meant to not to stop that, but to make sure that it can continue. But so we don't. I mean, for anybody, listen, my political leanings lean heavily towards certain kinds of anarchy. But the idea that we can live in an international system with no rules is insane. You're seeing now what it'll look like. The United States does what it wants. Israel does what it wants. China does what it wants, with no constraints other than what they personally consider their own best interests. We need international regulation, because when we don't have that, I mean, I just named only a few powerful states, and there aren't that many more to add to the list. And then, but on the other hand, the list of the states where people are suffering from that is incredibly long. So we need a rules-based order, but what are the rules and how are they enforced? The problem has been that we've had rules that were, number one, put together by the wrong people. I worked for years in the human rights world and with international law. And one of the biggest problems is that a lot of international law was actually, we talk about international humanitarian law, the laws of war. Most of that, or at least much of that, was created by military people. And the idea was to say, okay, how do we do wars with a certain rule book? Rather than how do we arrange an international order to basically not have wars? Um, why do we, rather than when is it okay to shoot someone else? You ask, how is it that, you instead make rules that say it's not okay to shoot someone else, and you make a couple of exceptions where there's absolutely no choice, like, real self-defense, that sort of thing. That's not the approach that the laws of war take. So, um, they take warfare as a given, and they say that there should be certain rules that, certain, rules that you work within these lines. Um, I think that's wrong. I think it's the wrong approach, and I think that the fact that we have had so much warfare in the past century um, is a reflection of that. So I think we need to think about rewriting international institutions, reforming international institutions. People talk about reforming the UN, but it's always in order to protect American power, or to make it more financially efficient. But it shouldn't be that. It should be, you know, to make it more effective as a global enforcer of an international order. And it should have teeth, and not teeth that can be completely retracted by the whim of five permanent members of the Security Council. Um, so that's number one. If we're going to have an international rules-based order, they have to be real rules that are taken on through the system that AOC is advocating, a working class center of politics. That's where those rules need to get developed. They need to be developed through a democratic process. We need to involve the people in the process, popular forces. That's what has not been the case up until now in these international fora. So that's number one. So then we think about how then would we want to see a United States president that is AOC? How would we want to see her pursue specific policies? So I would say that what you would want to do is not abandon the notion that different states have different interests. I think we have to be realistic about that. They do, but we should be encouraging partnerships rather than antagonism. We should be encouraging dialogue rather than competition. The idea that the fact that, for example, that China would see the United States developing, just say, Africa, some part of Africa, that they would see if the United States was actually doing something positive to really develop some state in Africa, that should be seen as a good by everyone. Again, and the United States should see that. And I reversed it intentionally because the United States has seen China's efforts to work on developing uh, um, countries in the global South, and encouraging development there, and financing developing there as a threat to us. Now, there's problems with the way China's gone about this. Big problems, the amount of debt that they have incurred, is a way of asserting control, and we can talk about that, and it's problematic, and that's not the way it should be done either. I am not advocating the Chinese method over the American method. What I'm saying is both sides are doing it wrong, and both sides are looking at it as a competition when it shouldn't be. We should be looking at, okay, we're going to develop it here, you're going to develop there, and the world is going to benefit from countries eliminating or reducing poverty, eliminating or reducing, inequality. Countries reaping the benefits of their own resources. That is a better world. It's a better world. Yes, it may mean that your particular band of CEOs don't get quite as wealthy as they did before, or maybe nowhere near as wealthy as they did before. They'll still be doing okay. Don't worry about it. They'll be all right. Um, but we should be seeing all of that as a global good. You know, we should be seeing working together on combating the climate crisis as a global good. You know, we should not be looking for how can we make up for India's massive industrialization causing so many problems with carbon emissions. Same with China's. How we should not be looking at the United States saying, the thing I saw today, Lee Zeldin, who's heading the EPA, which is bizarre as hell, said that the decision to to combat basically to combat the climate crisis is an attack on the American dream. That by him saying that is a threat not just to our well-being in America, it's a threat to the entire planet. Okay, and it should be seen that way, and it should be seen as something that the entire planet needs to come together to combat and say, "You're an idiot, get out of here." We need to do a lot more working together. Yes, it sounds like, I mean, yeah, and sure, in 1,000 years, I'd love to see if it's possible to have one world all together working for the common good. Um, I'm not suggesting that that's something that any American president, or anybody in anywhere can do in the next century. But I am saying that having that as an ideal is not a bad thing, and having that as a guiding principle for your policy is not a bad thing. Encouraging partnerships based on mutual interests and certain laws. What is democracy? Democracy is not majority rule. I mean, this is a complete misnomer. Democracy has certain basic norms to it about human rights, about equality, and about law. And these principles should be applied to not just to our democracy or European democracy, but to the entire world. These are good principles. These are principles most people find uncontroversial. They are not principles that somehow clash culturally with other people's. They don't. Human rights, equality, and the rule of law do not clash with other people's. Nobody, principally, no culture that I've ever encountered opposes those things. Governments do, but and create systems that do, but people want those things. We're all human beings. We all want our own dignity. So what would that look like? What would that look like, for example, in Ukraine? It would look like trying to find ways to work with, for example, and I've been suggesting this for quite a while, to work with China to find an accommodation that China can help enforce and press Russia to accept, that can allow Russia to not profit from its war in Ukraine, but prosper in its life. If we learned anything from the early part of the 20th century, it's that these punitive, when a country is defeated in a big war, and all you do is punish, 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 you get a lot worse after that. That's what happened between World War I and World War II. Maybe we should not make that mistake again. Okay, it shouldn't be accountability should not mean punishing the entire country of Russia. It may mean punishing Vladimir Putin and other specific people, but it should not mean punishing the entire country of Russia. We should find a way that China can use carrots and sticks that we simply don't have at our disposal, because threats aren't doing it, folks. To find a way, a path forward that both Russia and Ukraine can live with and grow from. The same, the same can be said about Israel and Palestine. We need to apply rules. We need to apply them fairly to both sides. Once we do that, there are issues that have developed over the past 100 years. Some people, approach this as, well, the other side just, particularly, if you support Palestinians and Palestinian rights, you say, well, this is all the Israelis. The Israelis did all these things. Maybe so, but if you want to have a better future, we have to find an accommodation that everyone can live with within existing rules, including the right of Palestinian refugees to return to Palestine. That is, that issue, the issues of Jerusalem, the issues of reparations, all of these things. And by the way, Israel's not the only one that owes the Palestinians reparations. Certainly the UK, the USA, Europe in general, and many of the Arab states all owe a debt to the Palestinians. Palestinians have been screwed by everyone. No one as much as Israel, but still, you know. Um, there's a lot there that can be done, and we know that a shift in U.S. policy will change that. What about in Sudan? You know, I mean, look at Sudan. We are, um, we have a very tight relationship with the United Arab Emirates. If the United Arab Emirates weren't arming the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, that war would end. Okay. So, I mean, on top of the fact that some of what they're sending to the RSF, they're buying from us. But even beyond that, if we told them, look, enough, no more, this is a horrific thing that's going on in Sudan, you have to stop or you're going to be jeopardizing your relationship with us, they'll stop. Okay, because their relationship with the United States is a lot, the UAE, I'm talking here, is a lot more important than arming the RSF. We don't do that. It'd be pretty simple. Again, we apply these, we should be applying these principles universally, you know, and they should be applied to all countries, allies, enemies, competitors, friends, it doesn't matter. They should all come along with one, they should all have to work under one set of rules. That's not the way we've operated, and it needs to be. Okay, because even if even if a certain American interest, corporate interest, financial interest, takes a hit, the overall good will be advanced by a world that is prospering and by a world that sees a United States system and a United States behavior that is helping it to prosper instead of hindering it. When we ask why do they hate us, there's usually a good reason that we're just not looking at. And it's not just a matter of, arms sales and all of our trade. This is a huge market. We have a lot of power because of the market that we have, not to mention the control we have over the financial system. And instead of using that to enrich oligarchs, what if we had a president that was leading us towards, incorporating human rights, rule of law, and wealth equality in our trade rules? You don't get to exploit the United States market if you're making all the bottom 40%, 50%, 60% of your population starve in order to enrich the upper 10%. You don't get to do that. You don't get to have both of those things. You want to trade with us, you have to address poverty in your own country. You have to, the wealth that you generate by doing business with the United States should be shared among your people, not held at the upper end. So these are, obviously big deals. These are obviously things that that would face quite a bit of pushback. I'm not saying these are not controversial. And I'm certainly not saying that these are principles that can just simply be installed and they'll work and it'll happen. No. Even if a progressive president like AOC or whoever, had two terms, they could not get all of these things to actually be instituted. I understand that. But if these are the principles that are guiding your policy decisions, okay, you're laying a groundwork for the future. And you're laying a groundwork that will be popular with a hell of a lot of Americans. Not all. There will be people who don't like it. There will be people who will lose money. There will be people who will lose status. There will be people who will, for whatever reason, get left behind. It's a problem. Nothing's perfect. But those, as matters of principle, those are winning items. Those are ideas that not only would succeed, but would, in their success, become popular because they will work for most people. They will lead to policies that help people. They will lead to policies like universal childcare, universal health care, you know, a higher minimum wage, a more progressive tax system, a smaller military budget, less support for dictators abroad. I mean, all of those things will be popular. They will be pushed back against, and not only by Republicans, they will be pushed back by a segment of the Democratic Party as well. But as we have seen recently, we've seen it in elections when people take progressive stances and they say, I'm going to do these things for you. People say, okay, show me. and they elect them and they say, go ahead and show me. That's what people said to Zoran Mamdani. People didn't just say, oh, Zoran Mamdani, you're so wonderful because you're going to give us free buses. Because you're going to stabilize rent. They said, show me that you can do it. And I tell you something, if Mamdani pulls it off, and I think he will, but if Mamdani pulls it off, they'll elect him again, and he'll be elected to a higher and higher office, and he'll get more and more popular, and more people who are right now questioning him will say, you know what, it works. Those things work. And let's say they don't like him because they don't like his supposedly anti-Zionist views. I think that's a extreme way to label his views, but whatever you want to, whatever you want to say, they don't like those. They'll say, I'll vote for this other guy who has all of all of the same policies except that one. It's not great. It's not what I want to see, but it means things are still progressing. And we can talk about how unpopular Israel is, and how AIPAC has to hide everything that they're doing. That's a different discussion. But I think that lays out the broad parameters of principles that AOC or any other progressive candidate can pursue in foreign policy, just by sticking to those principles. You can't institute the ideals that I've mentioned, but you can take a rules-based approach to Israel and Palestine, where we say, no, we're aid to Israel is done. Israel doesn't need it. Okay, Israel is not a poor country. They are not under siege. They are not under constant attack that they don't create by themselves. Okay, yes, October 7th was a horrible, horrific thing. Okay, but Israel is quite capable of defending themselves against things like that. The fact that they didn't is an enormous scandal inside Israel. Okay, they don't. People aren't mad at the United States over October 7th in Israel. They're mad at Netanyahu because he blew it, because he failed and he didn't use the resources that Israel itself has. So, you say no aid to Israel. We're not protecting you if you will do criminal things. We will work with you to bring peace and to bring justice. And that happens by giving Palestinians their rights. And we encourage that. And you would be amazed at how quickly Israel will change its behavior if that was the approach the United States took. Especially if we took it with the same vigor that we now take fomenting conflict, which is to say, we don't allow people to try to help promote peace. We lobby against that. We intervene with people that with other countries that Israel might turn to say, hey, the U.S. isn't doing what we want anymore. Please support us in this. And we intervene with those people and say, don't support this. We need stability in the Middle East. We need justice in the Middle East. We can do those sorts of things. That's, and it'll be hard. And it'll take time to change American policy that much. But you can institute policy changes at the outset that can make that a reality. We can stop the blockade of Cuba. We can stop the sanctions on Venezuela, which are at this point meaningless because the person ostensibly that we were sanctioning, Maduro, is no longer there. That's its own issue that we need to address itself. That's also not okay. But there's so much that progressive presidents can do, and you do those things by applying these principles. And as you apply these principles, you can build that international order that really is rules-based and has some teeth and has the faith of not just the American public but the global public. So that's where I hope AOC ends up going. In that sort of route. I don't suggest that she campaign on everything I just said, because I agree, it sounds way too radical. But I think that she has a lot of potential to win the Democratic nomination if that's where she decides to go. I think she could certainly win a seat in the New York Senate. And I think that the fact that she is now engaging in foreign policy is probably a good sign for Democrats and for progressives all across the United States. So I'll leave it there. Please do support Cutting Through if you can. You'll see on your screen how you can do that. And if you can't do that, just like, share, subscribe, do all those things that help boost the profile. And also, please comment on anything that that you care to comment on, and I'll talk to you again soon.